It's good to be back.
Hey.
Briefly. Most of you know, I'll just say, hi, Armand. We watch every week online because Armand has a lung disease that makes him very vulnerable. So we are not going out and about. This is a breakaway moment for me. So anyway, but I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad for the song that Lish sang today because it's part of the story. So let me read from the scripture for you from Acts 12. Does this thing tip up? Oh.
There you go.
There we go, Jeff. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So this is Acts 12, and it's the story that she sang about. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers. A little math there, that's 16. Each of them taking a part in this protection of him. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. This night, the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. The angel struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals." And Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating." When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter's at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." Because of an angel, but it was not an angel. But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described for them how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell the other James and the brothers about this," he said, and then he left for another place. In the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and then had them executed. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This is an amazing story of escape and freedom and of a faithful, prayer-packed house of believers that were incredibly faithful in prayer. This story challenges me in so many ways. It challenges me because of Peter's peace in the midst of terrifying situation. And the prayers of the people confound me. Although this event is not prescriptive, in other words, there's nothing to obey in it. It is, however, very descriptive and helpful and encouraging for us, so that as we meet the bullies of our world, we can be encouraged ourselves. So we're going to start with Herod. Now, this was a family name, the dynasty of Herod. And the first Herod we meet in the scriptures is Herod the Great. He was around at the time of Jesus' birth. And you know what he did when he heard that a new king had been born. He put the babies of Bethlehem to death, little boys, because he was afraid that another king might usurp him, his power, or upstage him in some way. And then came Herod Antipas. This was Herod's son. And he was the one that ruled during Jesus' time, and he had John the Baptist's head taken off because he too had an ego problem. Herod Agrippa now is the one who's ruling as Peter's put to jail. And he is a nephew of Antipas. He's now on the throne, and he's been arresting those who are part of the church in Jerusalem in order to appease the Jewish leaders. Herod Agrippa has already arrested and killed James, who was, of course, a close friend of Peter's, one of the sons of Zebedee. He was put to death with a sword. This pleased the Jews, who are obviously still trying to get rid of this cult, this sect that has arisen around Jesus, Messiah. This takes place during the time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Passover. We call it Passover. It was a time that many Jews would have come to Jerusalem to be there for the celebration. The chance for a wild display of his power was too much to pass up for this Herod. And so, in order to make points with the Jews, and perhaps with Rome as well, he decides that he will take Peter into custody and try him, put him to death after Passover. In the presence of this attack on Peter, this young church, it probably was maybe, a year or two old is all. It's a young church of believers. And these folks gather together in a home and are earnestly, fervently, passionately, those are all the words that we can, translate the word that's in the Greek. They were fervently, passionately praying to God for Peter. Now, don't you wish you'd been there to know what their prayers had been? I mean, were they praying for rescue, for mercy? What were they praying for? And did Peter tell them what to pray for? So often we come into a situation and we want to pray for somebody, but we don't know what to pray. I'm just saying, there's nothing wrong with asking, how can I pray for you? Sometimes you'll be surprised. Sometimes I've prayed for people in the hospital, and I've thought that maybe they wanted me to pray for their healing. But instead, they asked me to pray for patience. Interesting. So put your prayers where the heart of the person is. And when we don't know how to pray, we rely on the Holy Spirit to pray for us, don't we? Well, Peter's been arrested quickly, imprisoned, and just to be sure, there are 16 guys now making sure that he stays put so that Herod can go about his plan. And 2 of them actually are chained to him, and they're side by side with him in bed. Now, doesn't this sound cozy? I would say, and the other 16 take away 2, that's 14, are standing all over the prison grounds, keeping watch. I would say Peter's chances of getting out are pretty slim. So, the night before Herod's evil plan is to unfold, everything is set. Peter is sleeping between 2 guards, and he's bound with chains. Sentries stand at the prison doors, keeping watch. To me, it seems like overkill on Herod's part. But if Herod had his ears open, which he did, around Jerusalem, he would know that Peter had healed people. Peter had been preaching, and many had followed him. This little sect that was following Jesus was growing. Maybe Herod had more to fear. So, all is quiet. It's the middle of the night. And then the turning point of the event takes place. As people say today, the inflection point. But more informally, we might say, Shazam, right? Out of the blue, out of nowhere, an angel of the Lord appears in the cell where Peter is sound asleep and continues to sleep, folks. The cell fills with light, glorious light, and it doesn't awaken anyone, even Peter. And it makes me think of so many times when that God moment has been there and I've been unaware. And the only thing we can say, God's at work here. We're going to stop for a minute. Would you be sleeping if tomorrow was execution day and you were the planned executee? What was Peter thinking? How could he sleep through it all? How could he sleep when a close friend had just been skewered and he was to be next? He must have been thinking of God, only thing I can think of. Maybe the words of Jesus were coming back to his mind. Maybe he was thinking of Jesus saying to them, don't worry about tomorrow. Every day has enough trouble for itself. Or maybe he was thinking, in this world you will have trouble, but don't fear. I've overcome the world. Or maybe his heart was going back to verses memorized from Isaiah, in which he would hear, you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Well, whatever's happening inside of Peter, it's amazing. He continues to rest. We can't know it, but he must have been trusting somehow in God's power and God's remarkable presence. From where I sit, it's truly remarkable. I can have trouble sleeping with far less to worry about, and probably so can you. The angel pokes Peter on the side to wake him up. There's glory all around, and Peter needs to be awakened to it. A familiar problem for all of us, probably at one time or another. We are often asleep in the midst of God's amazing presence, unaware, fast asleep, needing something or someone to poke us into consciousness. So the angel speaks quickly, tersely to Peter with directions to follow. Get up, put on your clothes and your sandals, wrap your cloak around you, and follow me. The angel does the work of the Lord, the work that Peter cannot do for himself, only what God can do. Amen? Amen. As Peter gets up, as he begins to obey, the chains fell off his wrists. He leaves the two guards sleeping, follows the angel, all the while not sure, is this a vision, a dream, the pizza I ate? He doesn't know. The angel leads him right past the gate, past the guards, all out into the street. The gate has swung open of its own accord even. And when they've gone a short distance, just as quickly as the angel appeared to him, he disappears. God's work is done, and now the work of rescue is up to Peter. Peter is now convinced that what has happened is not a dream, but it's been God's doing, and that he has been rescued from Herod's clutches. I want to stop here and just consider Peter a few more minutes before we go on in the story. The night that this is taking place is a potential night of terror. Imagine if you knew tomorrow that you would meet with a sword. Imagine it. Imagine it. This is a time when Peter could have been filled with fear, but he seems able to sleep through that. But I'm not Peter, and I've had many nights, bad nights, restless nights without sleep. Nights of worry or regret, anxiety, fearsome dreams. Have you ever been filled with fear, especially at night? Do you ever climb into bed and it feels like your fears or your regrets or your hurts climb right in beside you and hold you in their sway through the night? Nighttime is so often a time when monsters come out of closets and from under beds. And even though we're grown up, they may not take the gruesome look that little children might guess that a monster has, but our monsters are pretty fearsome sometimes. They seem to hold us captive. They make us unable to sleep well as we rehash and rehash and rehash some regret or hurt or fear. Our times can be times when we feel utterly incapable of rescuing ourselves. Well, Peter can't get out of his situation, of course, and he has to have God do it. And you know what? God does. Because that's the kind of God we have. We were not created to live in prison, right? We were not created to be victims of bondage. God has stepped in and he's let us out. Galatians 5:1 says, "It's for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. You, my sisters and brothers, were called to be free." I think of the hymn we'll sing soon, "And Can It Be?" And that lovely verse that talks about God's eye diffusing the light. And then Peter stands up, goes forth and follows him, and we sing, "My chains fell off, my heart was free, I rose, went forth, and followed thee." When we sing that later, sing it loud. It's my favorite part of that song. My chains fell off, my heart was free. Now, it is true, and sadly so, that many times people who have been imprisoned by fears, by bad relationships, by harmful activities, by addictions or sin, that as we seek God's help, we find freedom, and we are so quick to pick up the chains again. And we walk right back into the prison where we were held. We return to what has become normal for us. It has a certain kind of familiarity and comfort because we know what that pain is like. You've likely heard of the abused woman's syndrome, where an abused woman often will keep going back into an abusive situation time and time and time again, never free. Because to live free requires courage, and it requires facing the bully that's put you there. I have a relative who was in that kind of situation, very abusive. She kept trying to make it work, escaping briefly, then running back, picking up the chains of her imprisonment, back into a cell. She kept trying. It took her several years and attempts before she risked and chose freedom. Her freedom didn't come automatically, and her freedom required hard decision and certain risks. We stood by her, but we were so proud of her when she finally said, "Enough." I wonder what our chains are today, what prisons we find ourselves in. You know, we were just in forced isolation, and many of us chafed at the fact that we couldn't go out, couldn't do anything, had to wear our masks, still are. We learned a bit about what that physical imprisonment feels like, but I think the imprisonment that comes from thoughts that are off base, lies that we tell ourselves, the kinds of attitudes and so on that are within us, the kind of choices we make, those prisons are even harder. It's not easy to admit you're a prisoner, bound by fears or regrets or addictions, whatever it may be. So the words of Peter's angel can be helpful to us. Wake up and see the light. Wake up, see the light. See it's all around you. Get up and get ready to move out. Waking up might be the hardest part because this takes self-reflection and the willingness to be brutally honest with yourself. It can be very hard to admit that we have a problem that's keeping us from the freedom we seek. I believe on another occasion I told you about how fear was my frenemy. That's a word they use now. Meaning that I hated to be so fearful. I missed out on so many good things. I didn't try so many things because I was fearful. And yet, there was a comfort because my fears kept me safe. I was super alert to any kind of catastrophe, even a mild one. I remember exactly the moment at which it was kind of like a waking up kind of vision. We were talking with some people about a person who had addictions, and all of a sudden, I saw myself at the bottom of a pit that I had created for myself, and I was bound by chains of fear. It was the moment that I said to God, all right, let's face the bully. We return to the flow of the story now. The angel did God's work on Peter's behalf, but Peter also had a job to do. He had to follow all of the directions of that angel, and he had to choose belief, not doubt. So he took responsibility. He has to think, where shall I go now? The angel's gone. My director is missing from the scene. Where do I go so that I can stay free? How do I make use of this new freedom? So Peter heads to Mary's house, a place where everyone has been fervently praying, passionately praying, earnestly praying. And when he arrives in the middle of the night, he finds that the prayer meeting is still going on. And a young girl named Rhoda opens the door. Well, maybe she didn't get it opened, but she heard his voice and she knew, it's Peter. We've been praying for him. She runs back to tell the adults, and guess what? They don't believe the kid. Maybe there's a little lesson here for us too. So those of you who are younger, don't give up on us. Keep telling us what you see, telling us the truth. You are not, maybe have not become cynical to the ways of this world. Maybe you can proclaim freedom where we don't see it yet. Please speak up and be part. She finally goes back and she tries to convince them, no way. But Peter keeps knocking, and so they go to the door. And guess what? What they have been praying for has come to pass. How could it be? I mean, that's their amazement, is it not? It would be easy to find fault with their amazement and say, well, their amazement shows they didn't have much faith. No, their praying shows how much faith they had. They kept praying to the end. We know, see, and they did too, that not every good person escapes the snares of the bullies in their life. And there will come a time when Peter will not escape future bullies, when his life will be taken. We too have our Ukraines, our Ethiopias, our marches for justice and freedom that seem unending and so often without any kind of result that feels good. So we know what they might have been thinking. So whatever it looks like to you, their amazement, to me it looks like the amazement of faith being realized, hope coming true. So this is the wonderful thing that the story of Peter now does for them. It confirms what a wonderful God they have. Peter then, after he explains to them what's happened, he heads out and away from trouble. And it's good. That was a wise move, because there's going to be a price to pay for his freedom, but he won't have to pay it this time. I love that Peter went to where his Christ-following friends are gathered in prayer. It's a safe place, a place filled with faith, hope, and grace. Sound familiar? It's a house of prayer. They took on Herod, the biggest bully of their time and place, and then they prayed through until the answer came. They prayed with earnestness, with passion, with fervency and hope. As Eugene Peterson puts it in the message, the church prayed for him most strenuously. Have you ever prayed strenuously? When all was said and done, they chose belief. Chris has called First Pres Church a house of prayer. What does it mean to be so named? What does it look like for a group of gathered followers of Jesus who pray passionately, earnestly, passionately, even strenuously? What does such a group pray for? And what does their prayer mean in the realm of God's work in the world? I don't have answers, if you were hoping I'd tell you. But I do have some thoughts. To be a house of prayer, I think, we will surely pray for ourselves, our sicknesses, our problems, our lives, our loved ones, our failures, even our sin. And I think just like the group at Mary's house, we too must take on the bullies of our world. We think of Ukraine. We think of Ethiopia. We think of drugs. We think of starvation. We think of mental illness. We think of hate and injustice and lies and liars and deception. And the list goes on and on. We must ask God, what bullies do you want us to confront in prayer? What prison doors might you be waiting for us to join you in so that you can swing those doors open? Surely they'll be a part of the battle that only God can do as he works and we join him, awake to his presence, following him into the battle. My dear Christian friends, I don't think these times are for the faint of heart, but for those who are awake, aware, obedient to God's direction. We will be counted among those who are learning to live free, confident of his present protection and his power. And one more thought. Who will come knocking at our door? Will they be met with grace, with hope, with love, with acceptance and embrace? We're going to sing 2 hymns this morning. One is And Can It Be? And when we get to the My Chains Fell Off, let them go, okay? And then before we close, we'll sing that beautiful song, Like a River Glorious, and that will take us back to Peter's wonderful rest in God. Because those who fight well are those who have rested well. Hidden in the hollow of his precious hand, never foe can follow, never traitor stand. Not a trace of worry, not a shade of care, not a blast of hurry touch the spirit there. Stayed upon Jehovah, hearts are fully blessed, finding as he promised, perfect peace and rest. May this be our testimony.